I've lived in Maplewood Hills for almost 20 years. Quiet streets, well-trimmed lawns, and an HOA that acted more like a royal court than a neighborhood committee. For years, I paid my dues, waved to the neighbors, and stayed out of their politics. I wasn't interested in petty power games or board elections. I just wanted peace. My home sat on 5 acres at the very edge of the neighborhood, far enough from the others that I could forget I even had neighbors. I was happy like that, until they came for my land. It all started one morning when I woke to the rumble of heavy machinery, the kind of sound that doesn't belong in a quiet community. At first, I thought someone was having a driveway redone, but when I looked out across my field, my stomach dropped. Bulldozers, excavators, trucks lined up like an army. And right in the middle of it, a man in a suit, sunglasses glinting in the sun, holding a clipboard and barking orders. They were digging. On my land. At first, I thought there had to be a mistake. Maybe the HOA had authorized a project nearby. But when I walked down and asked one of the workers what they were doing, he shrugged and said, "Commercial development. 12 units. HOA project. You'll love it. There's going to be a cafe." I blinked. "You're standing on private property." He laughed like I was joking. "Talk to the board, old man. We just follow the permits." And that's when I saw it, bright orange stakes hammered into the ground, marking boundaries that cut right through my property line. I went straight to the HOA office, a glass front building they'd built near the entrance of the neighborhood, filled with marble floors, fake smiles, and too much perfume. Behind the counter sat Cynthia, the HOA president, a woman who smiled like a politician and spoke like she was constantly explaining something to a child. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, without even looking up from her computer, "what brings you in today?" "You tell me," I said. "There's construction equipment on my property. Are you planning something I should know about?" She finally looked up, that fake smile stretching wider. "Oh, you must mean the commercial expansion. Don't worry, it'll raise property values for everyone in the area." "On my land," I said flatly. She said, clicking through her screen. "According to our records, that parcel is part of the community buffer zone." "It's not," I said. "It's mine. I've got the deed." Cynthia's smile faltered for the briefest moment before snapping back into place. "Well, there must be a clerical error. I'll have our legal department verify it. In the meantime, please don't interfere with the project." "Interfere?" I repeated. "You're stealing my property." Her tone hardened. "Mr. Reynolds, the board has already approved the development. If you create conflict, we'll have to fine you for obstruction. Let the process handle itself." I walked out before I said something I'd regret. That night, I pulled out every document I owned, the original deed from my father, the tax records, the survey maps. Everything pointed to the same thing. That land was mine. Every inch of it. But the HOA didn't care about facts. They cared about control. Within a week, they'd put up fences and signs. Future site of Maplewood Commercial Park. They even paved a temporary road cutting straight across my property. Every morning, I watched from my porch as more trucks rolled in, concrete poured, and steel frames rose from the soil my father once farmed. Friends told me to fight it. "Call the police," they said. "Get a lawyer." But I didn't. Not yet. Because while everyone else saw a helpless old man being pushed aside by a greedy HOA, I saw something else: leverage. I had the deed. I had patience. And I had a plan. But before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated? Treated like you were invisible? Right up until the moment you showed them exactly who they were dealing with? If you have, you'll want to stick around for this. Because this isn't just about land. It's about power, arrogance, and what happens when people forget that even the quietest neighbor can bite back. Now, where was I? Oh, right, the buildings. By month 2, they'd finished framing all 12 units. Brand new glass storefronts, polished sidewalks, decorative trees, the whole package. The HOA bragged about it in newsletters. A bold step forward for our community, they called it. They even hosted an exclusive preview event where Cynthia gave a little speech about innovation and growth. I stood in the back, arms crossed, listening to her thank the residents for their support. No one mentioned my name. No one mentioned whose land they were standing on. That was fine by me. The longer they ignored me, the better my case became. Because every nail they drove, every dollar they spent was going into my property. And when the time came to pull the rug out from under them, I wanted them deep enough in the hole that they couldn't climb out. So I waited. I watched them pour money into landscaping, signage, utilities. They even built a parking lot that wrapped around the edge of my yard. It was almost poetic. The same people who'd fined me for having an unapproved mailbox design were now investing hundreds of thousands of dollars in a land that wasn't theirs. One morning, I walked down to check on the progress. A man in a hard hat waved me off. "Hey, sir, this area is restricted. HOA property only." I smiled. "You sure about that?" "Pretty sure," he said. "Then you might want to tell your boss to double-check the deed." He gave me a blank look. "The what?" I chuckled. "Never mind. You'll find out soon enough." By summer, the buildings were finished. Shiny, modern, expensive, everything the HOA wanted to show off. They even rented out several units to small businesses. A coffee shop, a boutique, even a yoga studio. The place was buzzing. I let it happen. I let them celebrate. I even attended their grand opening, watching as Cynthia cut the ribbon in front of a crowd of smiling neighbors. I clapped like everyone else, because I knew that soon, very soon, all of it would be mine again. A week after the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I finally got the email I'd been expecting. Subject: Notice of Non-Compliance, Property Line Violation from Maplewood Hills, HOA Legal Department. I almost laughed out loud. The HOA had spent 6 months and hundreds of thousands of dollars building on my land, and now they were accusing me of violating their property line. That was the moment I knew it was time to end the game. But I didn't want to just win. I wanted them to feel it, the same humiliation and powerlessness they'd tried to drown me in. So I replied with a single sentence: "Let's meet in person. Bring your legal counsel." 2 days later, I walked into the HOA boardroom carrying one manila folder, just big enough to hold the original land deed my father had given me when I inherited the property. Cynthia sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. She gave me that same fake smile she always used when she thought she was winning. "Mr. Reynolds," she began, "we appreciate your cooperation. Our records indicate a discrepancy in property lines. Once we verify ownership, I'm sure this can all be resolved peacefully." I placed the folder on the table and slid it toward her. "Then verify it." She opened it, expecting to find some weak photocopy. But when she saw the notarized seal, the county signature, and the original date, her smile cracked. "This," she stammered, "this can't be correct. According to the revised subdivision plan," which was never legally approved, I interrupted, "because you build on a privately owned parcel without a public hearing or consent." Her lawyer leaned forward, scanning the papers. "Mr. Reynolds, are you suggesting that all 12 commercial units currently standing on that land belong to you?" I smiled. Not suggesting, stating. The silence that followed was delicious. You could hear the hum of the ceiling fan. Cynthia's voice wavered. This must be some kind of mistake." I leaned back in my chair. "Oh, it's not. And I've been patient. You've had 6 months to realize it. Now, we're going to talk about compensation." The younger lawyer cleared his throat. "Let's be reasonable, Mr. Reynolds. These structures were built under the impression that the HOA had legal right of development." "Impressions," I said, "don't override deeds." He frowned. "What exactly are you asking for?" I looked at Cynthia. "Every single one of those units now sits on my land, which means every square inch of that development is mine. But I'm not unreasonable. You can keep them for a price." Cynthia's lips tightened. "And that price is $10 million, I said. "Calm. Simple." The younger lawyer almost choked. "That's absurd. Is it?" I asked. "You built 12 units without a permit, without consent, on property that doesn't belong to you. You rented them out, collected profits, and called me the problem. You can buy the land, or I can evict every tenant and take possession myself. You have 30 days. Cynthia slammed her hand on the table. "You can't do this. We'll sue you." I stood. "You already did, the moment your bulldozers crossed my line." And then I walked out. The next few weeks were chaos. The HOA scrambled. They brought in surveyors, tried to challenge the deed, even attempted to file an injunction claiming community necessity. Every time, My lawyer shut them down. The county clerk's office verified my ownership twice. The HOA's buffer zone was nothing more than a clerical assumption that no one had ever double-checked. Their arrogance had built them a palace of glass, and I'd just thrown a stone. I didn't hear from Cynthia for a while after that. Rumor had it she'd stepped down for personal reasons. But the real reason came out soon enough. She was under internal review. Turns out, she'd authorized the entire project without proper approval from the state zoning board. In other words, she gambled with other people's money and lost. But the HOA didn't quit. They hired a new president, Mark Dwyer, a real estate developer with a smile too wide to be sincere. The kind of man who thought charm could outtalk truth. He called me one evening, smooth and confident. "Mr. Reynolds," he said, "let's be practical. We can't undo what's been built, and you can't exactly move into 12 commercial units. How about a fair settlement?" I asked, "What's fair to you, Mark?" He hesitated. $2 million. I laughed. "Try again." 3. Still too low. He sighed. "You're not being reasonable. You can't expect us to pay market price for something that was a misunderstanding." "Then consider it a lesson in reading property lines," I said. 10 million. Final offer. He tried to intimidate me with lawsuits, threats of legal delays, appeals. The usual HOA playbook. I didn't flinch. I'd spent my life fighting storms worse than this. Then, one morning, I got another visit, this time from one of the business owners renting a space on my land. It was a young woman who ran a coffee shop. "Mr. Reynolds," she said nervously, "I heard rumors the HOA doesn't actually own this property. Is that true?" I nodded. "Afraid so." Her face fell. "But I've already signed a 5-year lease. If they lose it, what happens to us?" I sighed. "That depends on how stubborn they are." She bit her lip. "You could take it all, couldn't you?" I nodded again. "Every inch." "Would you?" she asked softly. That question stayed with me. Because I wasn't a cruel man. I didn't want to ruin small business owners who trusted the HOA. My fight wasn't with them. It was with the people who thought they could take whatever they wanted just because they sat on a board. So, I adjusted my plan. Instead of kicking out the tenants, I offered them direct leases under me. Lower rent. No HOA interference. One by one, they signed. Within a month, the HOA's income from the complex vanished because their tenants now paid me. Mark called again, voice tight. "You're destroying this community's finances." "No," I said. "I'm just collecting rent on my land." "You'll regret this," he snapped. I smiled. "Maybe, but not as much as you will." By month 4, they'd burned through their emergency fund trying to fight me in court. But every time, the evidence came back to the same point. The land was legally mine. Their lawyers eventually advised them to settle. But before they could make a final offer, something unexpected happened. The local news caught wind of the story. Homeowner outsmarts HOA in multi-million-dollar land dispute. They interviewed me on camera. I kept it simple. They built on my land without permission. I let them finish, then showed them the deed. The clip went viral. Comments poured in from across the country. People cheering, others sharing their own HOA horror stories. I wasn't just a homeowner anymore. I'd become a symbol of standing up to corruption. And the more attention the story got, the more pressure the HOA felt. Mark called one last time. His voice was tired now. 10 million, he said. "You win." I didn't even smile. "Send it in writing." He did. 2 days later, the check cleared. But that wasn't the end. Because even after all the money, all the apologies, and all the paperwork, I realized something. The HOA had built those buildings on stolen ground, and no amount of cash could erase that arrogance. They thought they could bury the truth under concrete and contracts. But I had something stronger. Patience. And a deed. I thought it was over. The deed had spoken, the check had cleared, and Maplewood Hills had finally learned what happens when you build your empire on someone else's foundation. For the first time in a year, the sound of bulldozers was gone. The air was quiet again, peaceful, the kind of silence that feels earned. The tenants were happy. The small businesses were thriving under my management. The HOA, meanwhile, had gone suspiciously quiet. Too quiet. And that's usually when trouble starts. It began subtly. Letters stopped showing up. A few neighbors who used to wave from their driveways started avoiding eye contact. The HOA newsletter, The one they use to flood everyone's inboxes with stopped coming entirely. I figured they were licking their wounds. But a few weeks later, I found something in my mailbox that made my stomach turn. Notice of appeal. Case hashtag 2987B. Filed by Maplewood Hills Homeowners Association. Target me. The bold text below read, "The defendant unlawfully profited from the sale of community land. The HOA requests the reversal of compensation and the reclassification of Parcel 48A as shared community property." I stared at it for a long time, then let out a slow laugh. They were actually trying to take it back. They'd lost in open court, signed a legal settlement, and paid me in full. Yet here they were, filing a secret appeal behind closed doors. If arrogance were currency, they'd never go broke. I called my lawyer, Patrick, that same evening. He answered on the first ring. "You got the letter?" "Yeah," I said. "Tell me it's as stupid as it looks." He chuckled. "It's worse. They're claiming you misled the HOA by withholding documentation that could have proven their claim to the land. In other words," I said, "they're accusing me of fraud for proving ownership?" "Exactly." I sighed. "Unbelievable." "Don't worry," he said. "They don't have a case. We'll respond and shut this down before it even gets traction." But Patrick was wrong. Because the HOA wasn't after justice, they were after delay. They knew they couldn't win, but if they could drag this through appeals long enough, they might find a loophole or at least drain my patience and my wallet. And for the next few months, that's exactly what they did. I spent hours in meetings with lawyers, signing affidavits, attending hearings. Every time we shut down one claim, they filed another. Unauthorized zoning variance, unfair profit retention, community resource misallocation. They threw every meaningless phrase they could find into their filings, hoping something would stick. But I didn't flinch, because I knew how to wait. If they wanted a long war, I'd give them one. One morning, my phone buzzed. It was Greg, one of the local contractors who'd helped build the commercial complex. "Hey, Brian," he said, voice low. "You might want to come down to the site." "What?" "Because someone's been messing with your property lines again." I drove there in 10 minutes flat. Sure enough, new stakes had been hammered into the ground along the back end of the complex. The exact same orange markers I'd seen the first day they trespassed months ago. Only this time, the labels read Reassessment Zone, pending HOA claim. I felt my jaw tighten. They're trying to redraw the lines again. Greg nodded. "Yep. A couple of guys in suits came by this morning. Said they were from the HOA Land Committee. Try to tell me this back section belongs to them." "Did you stop them?" He grinned. "Didn't have to. Sheriff showed up 10 minutes later. Apparently, your lawyer called ahead." Turns out, Patrick had already filed an emergency injunction preventing them from stepping foot on the property without a court order. I couldn't help but smile. Remind me to give that man a raise. A few weeks later, the appeal hearing began downtown. The HOA's new president, Mark Dwyer, showed up in a navy suit and that same fake confidence he always wore like cologne. His lawyer, an older man with slick back hair, approached the bench with a stack of papers thicker than a phone book. "Your Honor," he began dramatically, "my client seeks only fairness. Mr. Reynolds has profited unjustly from a clerical oversight that this community trusted him to clarify." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You mean he didn't stop you from building on his land?" "Precisely," the lawyer said. "He allowed construction to proceed without informing the HOA of his private ownership, knowing that the project was funded by community resources." The judge leaned forward. "So you're saying it's his fault you didn't verify ownership before spending your money?" The lawyer hesitated. "Well, yes." That's when Patrick stood. Calm, confident, surgical. "Your Honor, may I?" The judge nodded. Patrick opened a small folder. Exhibit A. The original deed from 1974, notarized and recorded. Exhibit B. The HOA's internal memo approving the project without county verification. And Exhibit C. The signed settlement agreement, voluntarily executed by the HOA's current president, Mr. Dwyer. He turned, locking eyes with Mark. "Would you like to confirm your signature, sir?" Mark shifted uncomfortably. I can't recall." Patrick smiled faintly. "Then allow me to refresh your memory." He projected the document on the courtroom screen. The full-color scan, complete with Mark's electronic signature and timestamp. Gasps rippled through the audience. The judge looked unimpressed. So the HOA signed a settlement, paid $10 million, and now wants it back because they didn't like the outcome? The lawyer sputtered. Your Honor, my clients were misled. Patrick didn't even raise his voice. No, your clients were careless. And now they want this court to clean up their mess. The judge's gavel came down once, sharp and final. Appeal denied. The land and structures remain under full ownership of Mr. Reynolds. This court sees no grounds for further review. Mark's shoulders slumped. Cynthia, yes, she'd shown up too, sitting quietly in the back. Looked like she'd swallowed sandpaper. As I left the courtroom, Patrick clapped my shoulder. You handled that like a pro. I smiled. Didn't even have to say a word. For a while, things went back to normal. Or at least, as normal as they could be after a neighborhood war. But the truth is, winning doesn't always feel like victory. Because even though I had my land, my money, and my peace back, something inside me had changed. I'd seen what people were capable of when blinded by greed. I'd seen how a handful of signatures and a shiny idea could justify stealing from someone in broad daylight. And I wasn't about to let it happen again. So, I did something the HOA never saw coming. I bought them out. One by one, I approached homeowners who were tired of the HOA's drama. People who just wanted to live quietly like I once had. I offered to purchase their properties at above market rates. Within a year, I owned nearly half the lots in Maplewood Hills. The board couldn't stop me. I was within my rights. And when I finally owned a majority stake in the community, I called a vote to dissolve the HOA. That meeting was one for the ages. Mark tried to play tough, calling it an emotional overreaction. Cynthia called it unconstitutional. But the residents had had enough. When the ballots were counted, the result was clear, 62% in favor. HOA dissolved. Mark's face turned ghost white. Cynthia walked out before the results were even read aloud. I stood at the front of the room and said, You built your empire on my land. And now, it's gone, just like your power. The applause that followed was the sweetest sound I'd heard in years. That should have been the end of it. But just when I thought the story was finally over, a letter arrived from the county. A new zoning proposal. New developers. And guess whose name was listed as a potential partner? Cynthia Harper. The queen wasn't done playing. When I saw Cynthia's name on that zoning proposal, it hit me like déjà vu, same arrogance. Same greed. Just wrapped in a cleaner-looking package. She'd registered a new development company under the name Havenbrook Holdings. The plan was to build a series of eco-friendly office suites just outside Maplewood Hills, and guess what parcel of land she'd picked? Mine. Well, not technically mine. The land bordered one of my outer properties, a strip I'd recently purchased to expand my holdings. But the boundary was so close that any small survey error could spill right over into my side. Sound familiar? I almost admire her persistence. Almost. She'd lost everything: her title, her influence, her reputation, and yet here she was trying to claw her way back with the same dirty tricks. But this time, I wasn't going to wait until she finished building. This time, I'd be waiting for her before she even started. I spent the next week digging through public records. The company's registration, zoning submissions, permit requests, everything. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Cynthia hadn't learned a single thing. She'd used a fake signature from a co-investor who didn't exist, falsified property lines, and filed incomplete environmental reports. Her entire operation was built on lies, again. So, I decided to play her game my way. I drafted a short letter on official stationery, carefully worded and polite, to Ms. Harper of Havenbrook Holdings. As the neighboring property owner, I'm intrigued by your development project. I'd love to discuss potential collaboration opportunities and shared access rights. Please reach out at your earliest convenience. Respectfully, Brian Reynolds. I sent it by courier. Less than 24 hours later, she called. Brian, she said smoothly, her voice carrying that same false warmth I remembered all too well. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I assumed you were retired from real estate. Retired? I said. Not quite. I just like to pick my moments. She laughed softly. Well, this project isn't like before. I'm doing things legitimately this time. Sustainable energy, shared office spaces. The county loves it. I bet they do, I said. You've always had a way of convincing people. I prefer to think of it as leadership, she replied. Then you won't mind a little transparency, I said. Mind if I look over your boundary filings? I'm sure our properties won't overlap, but I'd hate for either of us to make a mistake. There was a pause. Of course, she said finally. I'll have my assistant send them over. Perfect, because the moment she did, she gave me everything I needed. That evening, I opened her digital files. They were supposed to show clear, legal boundaries. Instead, they exposed her entire scheme. Her eco-park was built directly over a protected drainage area, with falsified surveyor signatures and property coordinates that conveniently pushed her construction line 20 feet into my land. 20 feet. She couldn't help herself. So, I made a few phone calls, one to the county zoning office, one to the local news station, and one to my lawyer, Patrick. This feels familiar, he said when I told him. She's making the same mistake twice, I said. Let's make sure she pays double for it. He chuckled. What's your plan? You'll see, I said. But this time, I'm not just defending my land. I'm ending her career. A week later, Cynthia invited me to a community investors meeting at a hotel ballroom downtown. I arrived early, sat in the back, and watched as she glided across the stage like she still owned the world. Dressed in a tailored white suit, she looked every bit the polished executive. Ladies and gentlemen, she said in the microphone, Havenbrook Holdings represents a new era of responsible growth. Together, we'll bring innovation, beauty, and sustainability to our town. The crowd clapped politely. She continued, we've secured permits, partnered with investors, and ensured full compliance with county regulations. This project will not only enhance the economy, it will set a new standard for community leadership. That's when I raised my hand. Her smile faltered just a little. Yes, sir. Brian Reynolds, I said. Quick question. You mentioned full compliance. Can you confirm that your property lines were verified by a licensed surveyor? Her face stiffened. Of course. All filings are complete and transparent. Would you be willing to share them publicly? I asked. The room grew quiet. Well, she said carefully, that's proprietary information. But the county has copies, if that's what you're concerned about. Good, I said, because I sent those same filings to the county this morning, and they confirmed your surveyor's license expired in 2019. The murmurs began immediately. I stood up, holding a printed copy of her documents. This is your boundary report, isn't it? The one that conveniently moves your project 20 feet in my property. Her face went pale. You're mistaken. No, I said, my voice steady. You're repeating history. Someone in the audience gasped. The county inspector, who I'd invited quietly that morning, stepped forward from the back of the room. Ms. Harper, he said formally, we've received credible evidence of falsified documentation related to this project. We'll need you to come with us for questioning. Cynthia tried to speak, but the words died in her throat. Cameras flashed. Phones recorded. Reporters swarmed. She looked at me one last time, and in her eyes, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not arrogance, just disbelief. As they let her out, she muttered, You set me up. I shook my head. No, Cynthia, you set yourself up. I just made sure everyone saw it this time. The next morning, every local paper carried the same headline. Former HOA president arrested in new land fraud scheme. Havenbrook Holdings collapsed within days. Investors pulled out. Permits were revoked. Cynthia was charged with forgery, falsification of county records, and attempted land theft. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. Some victories don't need champagne, just silence. I drove out to the edge of my land that evening. The sunset burned orange across the horizon, the same color as the survey stakes she'd tried to plant again. I kicked one over, letting it fall flat into the dirt. Stay down this time, I muttered. A few weeks later, I got a letter, not from Cynthia, but from her attorney. A formal apology. My client acknowledges her actions and wishes to convey her regrets for any distress caused. I folded it neatly, placed it in a drawer, and left it there. Because some things don't deserve replies. That night, As I sat on my porch watching the lights of the commercial complex glow in the distance, I realized something. It was never just about the land. It was about principle. Power corrupts people faster than money ever can. Cynthia marked the entire HOA. They didn't just want control of my property. They wanted to believe they were untouchable. And the one thing they never saw coming was a man who refused to be intimidated. But just when peace finally seemed certain, my phone buzzed. It was Patrick. "Brian," he said, his tone cautious. "You might want to sit down." "Why?" "There's been an audit. The FBI is opening a full-scale investigation into the HOA's financials, all of it. Turns out your case exposed more than just Cynthia's fraud." I leaned back in my chair. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that they're looking at every transaction the HOA made for the last 10 years. I exhaled slowly. "Then I guess this isn't over yet." When Patrick told me the FBI had opened an investigation into the HOA, I thought he was joking. After everything we'd already been through, the lawsuit, the settlement, the scandal, I figured there was nothing left to uncover. I was wrong. Turns out, Cynthia's arrest had triggered a full federal review of every financial transaction tied to Maplewood Hills over the past decade. And what they found made everything else look small. Kickbacks, laundered construction contracts, fake invoices paid out to shell companies, even HOA maintenance fees being redirected into private accounts. It was corruption hidden in plain sight. The HOA wasn't just guilty of arrogance. It had been a front for organized theft, and the trail led all the way to the top. 2 weeks later, an unmarked sedan pulled up outside my house. 2 agents stepped out, flashing badges. Special Agent Lisa Jensen and Agent Cole Ramirez. "Mr. Reynolds," Jensen said, offering her hand. "We'd like to ask a few questions about your experience with the Maplewood Hills HOA." I invited them in. They spent hours at my kitchen table, recording everything, from the first time I heard bulldozers on my land to the day Cynthia was let out of that hotel in handcuffs. When I finished, Jensen closed her notebook. "You probably don't realize this," she said, "but your case is what cracked this entire thing open. Your lawsuit exposed the paper trail." I raised an eyebrow. "You're saying they were running this scam before me?" She nodded. "For years, HOA leadership was approving fake development budgets, funneling the money through contractors tied to Cynthia and Mark Dwyer. Every new community improvement project was another payout. So, they weren't just building illegally," I said slowly. "They were building to steal." "Exactly." She stood to leave, but paused at the door. "One more thing. When we subpoenaed the HOA's emails, we found messages about you. They called you a liability, said you'd ruin their entire system if you didn't fall in line." I smiled faintly. Guess they were right. News broke a month later. FBI launches full investigation into Maplewood Hills HOA corruption ring. The headlines spread like wildfire. The local news showed footage of agents carrying boxes of files out of the HOA office. Cynthia's name was everywhere again, along with Mark's and half the board. Turns out, they'd been siphoning money from every homeowner in the community for nearly a decade. The grand total? Over $4.7 million. When the indictment dropped, I read every line. Cynthia Harper, 12 counts of fraud. Mark Dwyer, conspiracy and misappropriation of funds. 2 accountants, 1 lawyer, even a county clerk, all caught up in the mess. It wasn't just justice. It was closure. For years, I thought I was fighting for a piece of land. But standing on my porch that night, watching the news replay the footage of those same people being led away in handcuffs, I realized I'd been fighting for something much bigger, truth. The weeks that followed were quiet. The commercial complex was thriving under my ownership. The coffee shop owner, the boutique manager, the yoga instructor, they'd all become friends. We even hosted a small event to celebrate the grand reopening under a new name, Reynolds Square. People laughed, smiled, toasted to the man who beat the HOA. But I didn't feel like a hero. I just felt free. One evening, I got another visit from Agent Jensen. She handed me a sealed envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Final report," she said. "The investigation's officially closed. You can rest easy now." I opened it after she left. Inside was a single page, An official letter confirming that the HOA of Maplewood Hills had been permanently dissolved by federal order. No appeals. No loopholes. No more board meetings. It was over. I sat there for a long time, staring at that letter. Then I walked out to my porch, the cool wind from the lake brushing against my face. The lights from Reynolds Square glowed softly in the distance, casting long reflections over the water. I thought my father, the man who'd given me that land so many years ago. He used to say, "A man's patience is his sharpest weapon." I smiled. He was right. If I'd rushed into anger, I would have lost. But I waited, watched, let them dig their own hole, then made sure the truth filled it in. A few days later, I went down to the courthouse for the final hearing. Cynthia was there, sitting beside her lawyer, pale and silent. When the judge read her sentence, 7 years, no parole for fraud and forgery, she didn't look at me. But as they led her away, she turned once. Our eyes met for the last time. No words, just a look, the quiet acknowledgement of someone who finally understood what she'd lost. I didn't hate her. I didn't feel anything really, just peace. That night, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I walked the path that ran behind the commercial complex. The air was filled with the smell of roasted coffee and warm bread from the bakery. Children laughed in the park. The street lights flickered on, casting gold across the pavement. The same land that had been a battlefield now felt alive again. And for the first time in years, I could breathe without waiting for the next fight. Sometimes, I still get letters from strangers who've read about the case or watched it on the news. They tell me their own HOA horror stories, the fines, the intimidation, the arrogance. They all ask the same thing. How did you keep your cool? And I tell them the same thing every time. Because anger only feeds people like them. But patience? Patience stars them. That's what this whole journey taught me. You don't always need to shout to win. Sometimes you just need to stand your ground and let the truth do the talking. So if you ever find yourself facing bullies hiding behind fancy titles and rules, remember this. Paper fades, power shifts, and greed always collapses under its own weight. But truth outlasts them all. And if you've ever stood your ground against corruption, injustice, or arrogance, you're not alone. Stories like this remind us that even the smallest voice can shake an empire. So if you believe in standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button, because I've got plenty more real stories where the quiet ones win in the end. The wind rustled through the trees. The lake shimmered in the distance. And for the first time since it all began, Maplewood Hills was finally silent. Not the silence of fear, the silence of peace. And that's how my story ends. The land reclaimed, the truth revealed, and the past finally at rest.